The town of Plainville. Established in 1721 at the geographical center of Connecticut.
All right, Robert, would you like to do the introductions, and then we'll begin with our work session from Ty and Bond regarding our landfill?
Yeah, in many ways, the landfill is the forgotten stepchild of Plainville. It's something we've been working on for a long time. We were operating, we have a permit to continue to operate the landfill, but we are under what's known as a stewardship permit. And and at some point in time, we have to wind down the operation and officially close the landfill, which can be a very expensive process. In the past, we've looked at possible ways of generating some revenue to help pay for the closing of the landfill. There's continuing requirements for testing and other items that we have to complete under our stewardship permit, and that's part of the reason for Ty and Bond and the team to run through that tonight. We do have a PowerPoint presentation which Kevin will help to put up on the screen as they go through it. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to, I think the team leader is Dana. You're the team leader tonight, and have him introduce his members of his team. But before we do, you'll see on your screen a person, Kylie Boulay. Kylie is an intern for town of Plainville. She's going to be working for us for the summertime, and she's going to read the happenings tonight. So she's helping us out, and so we thought we'd give her some. She's interested in seeing how town government operates. She's a UConn grad student. Kylie, you want to say a few words about yourself? Kylie, you there? We see you. All right, maybe she's shy. We'll catch up to her later.
I think she's having some trouble. She didn't have her camera or mic up, and she just dropped off. So hopefully she'll come back.
All right, hopefully she'll be around for happenings, although I can read them because I do have a copy of them if necessary. So, all right, so without any further ado, I will turn it over to Dana.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Kevin, can you put up our presentation? Great. Can you go to the next slide, perhaps? Thank you. So, Robert and Council, thank you for inviting Ty and Bond to your special meeting tonight, this working session. I'm the principal for Ty and Bond on the landfill projects and moving forward in the past. James Olson is with us tonight, and James is the project manager on the environmental side, and assisting him is Nick Granata. He's our environmental specialist, and he'll be speaking tonight. And then Jacqueline Kachechi is with us as well, and Jackie would be the project manager should you decide to move the landfill project expansion forward, or in any event, the closure, if it's the existing closure of the landfill. Jacqueline would be our project manager. Kevin, next slide, please. So here's an outline of what we want to walk through tonight. Kind of the status of what's going on with the landfill. Jim will talk about the stewardship permit requirements. Nick will talk about our ecological risk assessment. Back to Jim on RCRA requirements, and that is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And I'll apologize right up front if we put an acronym out there that you don't understand what it is. Ask us to give you a little information on that. After each one of us speak, we'll open it up for questions on that particular piece. But certainly, if you have any questions as we're going along, we encourage you to ask those. And then I'll go through the landfill closure and some of the capacity opportunities, and then we'll talk about some of the next steps. So, Robert, I understand that in the agenda, you did pass out a copy of the memorandum that we put together for you and John Bosch a little while ago, and that you had highlighted some of the, I think it was the town that highlighted a few of the tasks. So We'll go through that towards the end of the presentation. Kevin, next slide, please. So your current landfill is considered operational. It's open, it's not closed. There's volume that remains in the landfill, which is why they consider it open. Your landfill area includes, this is all behind the DPW, includes a transfer station and recycling center. And then on top of the landfill, you're permitted to compost leaves. And that's beneficial because whenever you close a landfill, you have a large volume of composted vegetated material up there that will be able to be used in the closure as the final layer, and it's called the vegetation layer that supports the grass on the landfill. So you're well ahead of the game on some of the costs by keeping that there. Currently, you're permitted through what they call a stewardship permit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Jim Olson will spend a little more time on it. But it was effective in September of 2011, and it's a 10-year permit, and it's set to expire in September of 2021. And the reason that's important is you won't have all of the things under that permit done by 2020, meaning you won't have the landfill closed, which really starts the clock on a lot of the items in the stewardship permit. So our recommendation would be to renew that, and that would be needed to be renewed in March. They needed 6 months before the expiration date. And then there's a data gap assessment that was completed underneath the stewardship permit. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation tonight. We had a scoping level for the ecological risk assessment. That's the ERA. And that was completed. The scoping was, and then as well, there was an initial screening level for the ecological risk assessment that was completed. And again, we'll explain that a little bit more as we go through this. And then RCRA status, again, that's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act status, has 2 milestones currently met and approved by both Connecticut Deep and EPA. Currently, the RCRA groundwater monitoring program remains in place. And what we've seen since we've been on board with the data and the water quality is it's very, very consistent over time. There is a little bit of degradation, but nothing, as you'll hear when we go through our assessment, that's requiring you to do any kind of cleanups. And then on record is a plan from 1982 that establishes the top elevation or the final grading of the landfill. And again, that's the plan that's on file. And we'll go through a little bit of that towards the end in the landfill piece and explain to you what we would like to do or what some of our recommendations and options are. So I know some of you have seen similar presentations from us before, but others have not. And you're new to the council, so welcome to the council. And again, any questions as we move forward, please let us know. I'm going to stop here and ask if there are any questions from anyone at this point, because I'm going to turn it over to Jim to go through some of the stewardship permit information. Any questions? Okay. So Jim, if you would, Kevin, next slide. And Jim, if you would take over on the stewardship permit.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Jim Olson. Just going to give you an overview of the stewardship permit. Ty and Bond originally came on board to work for the town. You had the stewardship permit in place, respond to an RFP. And the stewardship permit is like an umbrella permit. It's meant to address multiple regulatory requirements for a site. Like a site like the Plainville landfill, the two main existing programs up until the stewardship permit was issued is the solid waste, which dates back a number of years, and the RCRA requirements. And as Dana said, the RCRA is a Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which is a federal program that regulates hazardous waste disposal. And we'll be giving you some more details later on, but there's basically a cell a small area on the landfill where hazardous waste was placed when RECRO was passed in 1980. And the solid waste regulations predate that, and was a landfill that was sited in that area in the 1950s and eventually fell under the solid waste regs in 1971. So this stewardship permit is meant to be an umbrella permit to, streamline all the different programs under one umbrella, so you can move through the process of completing the landfill and closing it. So there's some bullet items here. It defines the long-term obligations for the permit holder, which is the town. It is transferable to future owners, provides public participation through the process. And we say cleanup process, essentially it's a closure of the landfill. Documents a cleanup as it's completed, and provides a mechanism for site closure, and also imposes financial assurance, et cetera, for the cleanup work. Next slide, please. The main requirements of the stewardship permit, it's a retention of a consultant, which is time bond. And then you go through some various environmental steps, a data gap and ecological risk assessment. What a data gap assessment is basically looking at the landfill and evaluating, has it been evaluated enough so you know the degree and extent of environmental impacts. And we all know it's this big, large landfill sitting there that was sited back in the 1950s, and everybody knew it was going to cause some kind of an environmental impact. And that's what every town did back then, is place these landfill in these kind of wetland areas. And the ecological risk assessment is a standard requirement of the RECRA program, and applies to any site in the RECRA program. And there's many types of sites in the RECRA program that generated hazardous waste, anywhere from like a landfill facility or a manufacturing facility, et cetera. And for the ecological risk assessment, you would be looking at impacts on the wetlands and the surface water surrounding the landfill. And as I said previously, when this landfill was sited, everybody knew there was going to be some impact on those resources. It also requires development of closure and post-closure plans, public participation, a revised water quality monitoring plan. When the permit was issued, there already was an existing groundwater monitoring program that was in place for many years. Has been followed under the solid waste permit, and also a quality assurance project plan. And that's just a plan that outlines how you're going to collect your samples, how you analyze the data, how the lab's going to do its work. So it's in accordance with industry and Connecticut Department of Energy Environmental Protection, or DEEP, standards. So, several of these requirements kick in following closure, but a number of these tasks you need to get going on and work on them in anticipation of closure. And we're going to be talking about those a little bit later on. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Nick Granata. And before I do that, are there any questions? Okay, Nick.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Nick Renata, and I'm Connecticut LEP, like Jim. And I've been working on various technical components of the landfill for the last several years. The next, series of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more detail regarding the data gap assessment and ecological risk assessment tasks, status of those, what we've done to date, and essentially what's left to do to date. So before we get going, if you see the image on the slide, just a few key areas to point out. Jim mentioned it before, what's referred to as the RECRA cell. You can kind of see it up there in the sort of central western portion of the site. It's annotated there so you can see it. That's the location of the hazardous waste cell. It's a relatively small area, generally in comparison to the entire landfill. You have the municipal solid waste area, which is sort of centralized in the in the landfill. There's an annotation towards the bottom of the screen. It's called Area of LNAPL. We'll get to that in a minute, and I'll explain what that's about. And then you're going to see some locations that are shown in kind of like a purplish color. Those are the existing monitoring wells, and where they're essentially located throughout the landfill. For discussion purposes, it's kind of important to point those things out. So getting into the data gap, a few years ago, we did a data gap assessment. Essentially, it's sort of a paper study of the landfill. We looked at its history. We looked at all the data, all the files and records that we could obtain. We did site walks. So we pulled all this information together as required by the stewardship permit that was mentioned earlier. And really the reason that it's required is the permit requires getting an understanding of kind of baseline environmental conditions in the landfill. So we need to understand what was going on in the landfill, and per the stewardship permit, if there were, are there any gaps, in the data. There were two primary findings, from that assessment. One of them being lack in coverage of monitoring wells. If you're looking at the northern portion of the landfill, your eye will kind of catch this really quickly. You don't see a lot of purple dots. There's lack of monitoring wells along that part of the landfill. So that was one of the primary data gaps, and that's one of the tasks that we proposed to do in 2020 in the memo that we've provided. We'll need to fill in those areas with some additional monitoring wells. Generally speaking, we're not expecting to find any surprises, probably more of the same, but it will help support the inevitable closure of the landfill to address that gap. So that was the one primary one. Getting back to the second major finding was what's referred to as the area of LNAPL at the bottom of the screen along the southern side of the landfill. LNAPL stands for light non-aqueous phase liquid. And essentially what that is a layer of petroleum floating on the water table. It's been there for several years. It's been seen during the routine monitoring that occurs year after year after year. We are uncertain as to what the source of that is. So that's just something that's going to have to be resolved as part of the closure and as part of the stewardship permit in general. I'm going to switch gears and move on to the ecological. Kevin, you can roll to the next slide. So moving forward with the ecological risk assessment, it's basically this kind of goes across two slides here. It can be a 2 or 3 part process. The first two that you see here on this slide are the scoping level and the screening level. The scoping level has been completed. And essentially, again, it's kind of another paper study. You're putting pieces together to determine if there's any possibility of there being ecological impact. Now, getting back to what Jim said before, when the landfill was sited back in the 50s, there was always the expectation, of course, there's going to be some kind of environmental impact. It's a landfill. It was sited on a wetland. So that's to be expected. So that particular phase of work was, okay, yes, there is the likelihood. So let's move on to the next step, which is actually the screening level ecological risk assessment. What that now involves is actually going out, doing a little bit more detailed work, starting to collect samples of, obviously there's water quality data that's generated year after year from the routine monitoring, but Ty and Bond actually went out a few years ago and we actually collected sediment samples around the entire perimeter of the landfill. And that data was generated, put in a report, and submitted to Connecticut DEP. Kevin, you could roll to the next slide. This continues on. That's essentially where we're at in the process. You can see by the green check marks. So we're at the scoping level ecological risk assessment, and we're currently working with Connecticut DEP to determine if we'll need to go on to the third part of this process, which would be a site-specific ecological risk assessment, where essentially it's just going to get more in depth, more defined. It could require bringing on a specialist who identifies species or biological, and ecological species, that surround the landfill. We're currently working, hopefully not to go down that road. That will be determined by DEP to see if they'll agree with the arguments that we've made in the scoping level ecological risk assessment. But that's essentially where we stand. Both of these are requirements of the stewardship permit and the RECWA program, which Jim will get into in a little bit here. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see a larger image of the landfill there. The red squares represent the sediment samples that we've collected around the landfill. And based on the data that we've obtained from those samples, it does not appear as if there is a significant impact from the RCRA hazardous waste cell, meaning that groundwater is not leaving the cell and migrating and discharging into wetlands at concentrations that are hazardous, or we're seeing hazardous constituents. So this is the point of where we're at with DEEP, is determine, will they want more? And moving on to that site-specific ecological risk assessment. So a lot of technical information. Any questions regarding this content?
I have one question, Nick, if you don't mind.
Sure, Robert.
You point out that the existing monitoring wells are located, you know, kind of the south, you know, south and on the east side of the landfill, southeast side. There's a reason for that, isn't there?
There is, yeah. You know, a lot of them are.
We just didn't forget about the ones to the north. I mean, there's a reason why they're located there and not to the north, at least to date.
They're down gradient of the municipal, you know, when we say hydraulically down gradient, meaning, you know, groundwater flows from high point to low point. So a lot of those are hydraulically down gradient. But what we've seen, and to take a step back to the data gap, the reason that we're proposing wells along the north side, Robert, is what we're actually seeing in this landfill is radial flow in the groundwater. So it's actually moving not only to, you know, towards the Peckelbuck River, which is to the east. So it's moving east, southeast. It's actually flowing to the northeast as well. And that's a condition that, you know, sort of a hydrogeologic condition that is sort of formed around this landfill. You're seeing a radial flow condition from the landfill.
Right, and I guess the point that I would make is that the assumption was that, you know, it would flow towards the river, the low point, and that your studies over the last, you know, several years have indicated that you know, it's got more of it has some radial flow to it, so that's what's requiring the data gap, you know, work.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Kevin, next slide, please.
Slide.
And then the other thing I would just say before we move on, Jim, is think of the landfill and all of the trash that's in that as a sponge. So as there's water around the perimeter of the landfill, it tends to mound the water inside, which is why we're getting this radial flow out of the landfill. It's very typical of a landfill. So Jim, if you would kind of walk through some of the RCRA requirements here.
Sure, Dave. Hey, Kevin, could you just back up on that one slide, please? I just want to point out a couple of site features. Okay, before we leave here, again, Nick pointed out the RCRA cell located down in the southwest part of the site. And when RCRA was passed in 1980, it required landfills like this to consolidate their hazardous waste in a cell. That cell has since been closed and approved, so that part's been closed. And then you have the rest of the landfill, which obviously hasn't been closed. And then you can see where the sediment samples are collected around the landfill. Like Nick was saying, the impacts in the sediment samples indicate that we're not seeing any kind of release out of the hazardous waste cell. They're typical like landfill leachate impacts, which will attenuate with time. I've worked on very similar sites in my career. The Windsor Bloomfield landfill, the Bristol landfill, the Danbury landfill are just like this with hazardous waste cells. So nothing out of the ordinary here for this type of site. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, Kevin, next slide, please. So I'm going to get a little more in the weeds on the RCRA program. You know, again, we have the two main programs, the RCRA program, which regulates hazardous waste, and the solid waste program, which regulates everything else, and the umbrella permit over that. Now, the RCRA program, you know, it's a federal EPA program that's delegated to the state, to Connecticut Deep, and it's a little complicated. It basically is a cradle to grave program that regulates anybody that generates hazardous waste and anybody that disposes of it on their property. So it's a pretty rigorous program. It's similar to the Superfund program, and its main goal is to eliminate the generation of hazardous waste. And so the site basically falls in what they call the RCRA Corrective Action Program, which means that there has to be some kind of action taken or some kind of cleanup or some kind of closure. And then there's specific requirements of that record corrective action. And then the record program has this thing called environmental indicators and milestones. It's just a technical term used to show that you're making progress through the record program towards closure. So the first one is this EPA form CA 725. And it's a form you go through. It's a several page form. You have to go through a series of checklists and evaluation as an LEP. Then you present it to the state, and we have done that for this form. And it says, basically what it asks you through a series of analyses is, are human exposures under control? And we went through that, and it's yes, the landfill is closed. Well, it's everything is covered at the landfill with some kind of a daily cover. The wrecker cell has already been closed, so we can check that one off the screen, so we're good there. On the next form, the CA 750, they're asking you, is migration of contaminated groundwater in control? And as I was saying before, there's no evidence of saying that there's anything leaching out of the hazardous waste cell. It's been closed. Where we're seeing the groundwater, is typical landfill type of leachate impacts that are expected to attenuate over time. There's a couple snippets there from the form you can look at. Next slide, please. And so the next step is this form CA 400, which gets, as you go along this program, it gets a little more complicated. This is the final remedy design. It's which you propose to DEEP and ultimately EPA if there's any kind of remediation that's required. And so the cell is already closed. We're done there. Now the next step would be, has there been anything released to groundwater? Not really. And the remedial scenario here would be just to monitor it with time and let nature take its course. So that's like the best case scenario. So to close out under the record program, cell's already been closed. We're looking at groundwater. It's not that impacted. It'll just attenuate with time, and we can close out under the record program under that mechanism. Now under the solid waste regs, and Dana will be getting to that more later on, you basically would close and cap the whole facility. Both those efforts done under the umbrella permit to achieve final closure of the landfill. And then lastly is just the CA 550, which is the final report and form you do when everything is completed. Any questions on the record program? Everybody still awake? Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Danny. He's gonna talk about some of the landfill closure options.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So currently, if you were to take a vertical slice through the landfill, this is kind of what you would be looking at. We've got a line there that says existing grade, and as I mentioned, the landfill is operational, and there is some volume left. One of the first slides, I had a 1982 date that there was a grading plan put together, and so the top line at elevation 235 kind of represents what the final elevation of this would be, and these are feet. 235 is feet above mean sea level. So there's about 75,000 cubic yards of volume left in the landfill that the town can use. And right now, I believe it's set aside for bulky waste. We see this as an opportunity to do something different, regardless of whether you use the 75 or not. At some point in time, you're going to be required to close the landfill. And so I'm sure you don't have a bank account sitting there with the money in there needed to close this. So how do you generate revenue? So we started these discussions with Connecticut Deep and Robert and John, and we've had a few meetings, and Deep came back. Kevin, if you can go to the next slide, please. So they came back and they asked to look at 3 different closure types. One was using synthetic materials, which is what we're recommending, and I'll explain that in just a second. Another one was to put on what is the conventional soil cap of 24 inches with impervious soils versus a synthetic material that becomes the impervious layer. And then the last one is a 48-inch soil cap, which Connecticut Deep thought would be the cheapest option. And that's just basically separating the waste from human exposure by 48 inches. The middle one is by 24, but with some very impervious, like clay type materials, earthen materials. And the top one is with more synthetic man-made materials. And the reason we usually go with a synthetic cap is it's much thinner, has a better quality of construction. It's easier to monitor that quality, and it saves space. So if elevation 235 is where you need to be, it's where the grass grows. So if we are going to put in a 48-inch soil cap, now we have to stop filling 48 inches below that. That's 4 feet. There's a lot of volume in there, and there could be a lot of revenue in that. So our recommendation, and you can see that a couple of years ago, we did an evaluation of the cost, and relatively speaking, they're all about the same cost. But what I would say is that from a quality installation perspective, construction quality perspective, synthetic is the easiest way to go. On top of closing, once you're done with that, you then are required to do 30 more years of post-closure maintenance and monitoring. So that's any erosion that occurs, that's cutting the grass at least once a year. It's continuing the groundwater monitoring.
Hey, Dana.
Program. It's those types of, and I'm not saying that at the end of the 30 seconds. Excuse me?
Dana, you just froze up for the last 30 seconds or so.
Okay. So where did I stop, Jim?
You were starting to say about you got into the 30-year post-closure monitoring maintenance period.
Okay. So once you're done with the closure, that initiates the 30-year post-closure maintenance period, which is cutting the grass, correcting any erosion that may occur, monitoring the stormwater, to continue your groundwater monitoring program. And right now it's 30 years. We'll see in 30 years whether that gets extended or not. But likely along the way, what we've been able to do, because the groundwater monitoring shows that there's a relative level of impact that it doesn't change, we're able to reduce the frequency. Kevin, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's about 75,000 cubic yards remaining in the current grading plan that's on file with Connecticut Deep, and we think that there's opportunity for you to accept lightly contaminated or lightly impacted soils like that would come from an underground oil storage tank or gasoline tank, petroleum products, that type of material. There's no home for that material in Connecticut. And so there's some volume options that we've gone through, and we've looked at some of the operational issues. The hurdles to moving this forward, and I'll show you a few more graphics. The hurdles to moving this forward is getting the approvals through Connecticut Deep. We've had a few meetings. There are difference of opinions in some of the environmental folks at Deep, but I think in general, it's a permittable option is to vertically expand the landfill to accept enough material to close the landfill. But there's a process that you have to go through. Part of that process is going through a public outreach. And so you need to get the public's opinion on this. At some point, the public's going to pay for a closure of the landfill, or the town is going to pay for the closure of a landfill. And again, I know you don't have, a special account sitting aside with closure monies in it. At some point, you're going to have to raise money. If you don't raise it through revenue of bringing in material, it's going to be through some other source, and usually that's taxation. And then you have to complete the ecological risk, and Nick already went through that, and we're hoping that based on what we've found to date, that they're not going to make you go through an extended review. And then, as I mentioned, the closure liability, and you saw in a previous slide, it's close to $8 million. You know, if this gets put off for another 5 to 6 or 7 years, that cost will be higher by then, just because of escalation. Kevin, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the light brown is the original with the existing grade, the additional 75,000, it brings you up to that elevation 235. We've proposed going up to elevation 275. Sounds like a lot, but it's 40 feet. It's really not a lot, but it would allow about 440,000 cubic yards of material to come into the landfill. Depending on market conditions, we've done a pro forma on this, and this would generate enough money for you not only to do the closure, but also the 30-year post-closure maintenance requirements, and then there would be some leftover as well. We met with Connecticut Deep on this, and you know, they were concerned about this 40-foot expansion, and they wanted to know what they came back with was, we think you're the expansion. If you want an expansion, all you need to expand is to cover the cost of the closure of the landfill. Well, we have a different opinion of that, and if you're gonna, they don't have another option right now, by the way. So if they have an option, it would make sense for them in Connecticut, because right now these materials are going out of Connecticut, so there's a lot of transportation cost. If you can save, you know, the disposal of this by the ton or by the cubic yard, then they can do more profit.
Hey, Dana, you froze up again.
Projects under grants and whatnot,
Hey, Dana.
but on the risk of having this material come into your coffers. I did. Where do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you
Can you hear
froze
me?
up right when you were talking about the types of materials you can take in the landfill.
Lightly impacted materials. So was that a long time ago?
No, it was just maybe like 15 seconds ago.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so we have a difference of opinion that we think that if you're going to accept this material, you might as well maximize the volume that you can put in here. So Kevin, can we go to the next slide, please? If they come back and say, you know, we want you to break even here, this is what it would look like. We would reduce the height by about 13 feet. So you'd end up with about a 27 foot height increase over the existing closure plan. And this would bring you to this should bring you enough money or enough revenue rather to cover your closure cost, the operational, when you're bringing in the materials, and the 30-year post-closure period. So Kevin, next slide, please. So we've broken it down into 3 phases if you were to move the expansion forward. One is, as I mentioned, you currently have a permitted leaf composting operation on top of the landfill, so we would have to relocate that. And that's an important operation. It has generated a lot of vegetative support material that you can use for the landfill to help reduce your disposal costs. Our recommendation on phase 1 is to be the most eastern part, so towards the airport side, is to fill that up first. Then you would commence the filling up activities, and then once you've generated revenue from that cell or that phase, then we would recommend closing out the slopes below the current height and up the side of this phase around the base. Then we would move into phase 2, which would be the more western piece towards the DPW, but still up on the mound. You commence those filling activities, and that would generate enough money for you to close out the phase 1 area that you've just finished. And then phase 3 would be to prepare the area, the lower area towards the DPW facility. There's waste underneath that needs to be closed out as well. You would also need to relocate and rebuild your transfer station because that's in that area, and then you need to close beneath that. And then the final piece would be closing out both phase 2 and phase 3 at the same time. Kevin, if you would go to the next slide. Before we go here, I'm gonna let Jim talk about the soil acceptance plan, which is part of the approval by Connecticut Deep. Are there any questions on the options or the potential to expand the landfill?
Madam Chair, this is Christopher Wazorko. Can I ask a couple questions?
Surely, go ahead.
Hi, real quick, how long, whether we came to an agreement on the $375,000 or 375,000 cubic yards of material or the 440,000 cubic yards of material, how long would it take to deposit that much material?
Yeah, I'll start the question, and then since Jim is more in the soil moving business than I am, I'll let him correct me if I misstate. But Chris, it's really going to depend on where the market is and how much brownfield work we'll say, and how much underground storage tank cleanup there is, and contaminated material that's out there that needs a home. One of the good things about Plainville is you're almost geographically centered in the state. So anywhere in the state can get to you about the same distance.
Yeah.
It could take 2 to 3 years if we have a really robust market, or it could take 5+ years if the market softens up. Something along. I think it's something along those lines.
Years. I guess that's the point. We are talking years.
Oh yeah, you're talking years. Yeah.
Okay. And the second
Jim,
question I have, I'm sorry.
Jim, can you add to that or not?
I will, Dana, when I get into this, but I agree with everything you said, and then I can add more to when I start this section. But I think Christopher had another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Just real quick, regarding the airport, there's no issues with the airport literally being next door. That's been addressed. I assume it has. I just want to publicly ask that question.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really good question, and you would think that, okay, so you're going to raise the height of this landfill. Are you going to impact the flight paths or anything of the airport? So the airport does, and we've looked into this, and we've looked into it with John Bossi as well. There's 2 cones. It's really a 3-dimensional cone, but as you're going down the runway, there's a cone that goes out away from the runway. The landfill is outside of that cone, and then there's also a vertical cone. And even if we go up, because they're 3-to-1 side slopes, we don't impact that cone. We're outside of what the FAA considers the zone, protected zone for the landfill runways. So we're clear with that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'm all set.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have a question, Rosemary Moranti, Madam Chair. Hey.
Go ahead, Rosemary.
Go ahead. Okay. I think that when I first was elected to the council, we had a presentation. I remember asking at that point about identifying some of the sites that have accepted the impacted soil. Would it be possible to do an updated list of those? I think some were in Connecticut and some in Massachusetts, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we certainly, Rosemary, we certainly can do that. Yes, and we did provide a list at that time. And there's been some new ones, and there's been some that have closed. So yes, we will update that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. It would be good to do a little research and see how they are doing with them, and if there's any issues that have arisen.
I will say in response to your question, there was an attempt by a private entity on a public landfill in a Rocky Hill that did not go well, but it had environmental issues that they were not addressing. So in our opinion, it was not approached in the right manner.
Okay. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind when I with anything I read. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Dana, to date, the state has been reluctant not even to allow us to go even above what our permitted level is right now. So even if we went to the break-even point, they're they're not giving us a much support for that level either.
Yeah, you're right. Until you file the application, Robert, there's no guarantees. I mean, you could come back and have a major uproar by the public that doesn't want to see this. And whether it's the trucks through the neighborhood, from the highway to the neighborhood. And I realize it's not a long trip, but it's still a trip through the residential area. I mean, that could be a major factor. That's something that we have to look at. And it's why you go do a public outreach, is to get their feel for this. And my guess is, if you do decide to move forward, you probably would do some sort of referendum to move this project forward as well.
Well, a couple of things. One is that I think people are going to have questions about impacted soils coming into the slightly impacted soils at any level. Okay, people are going to have questions about it, but the DEEP people have assured us, and never mind the consultants like yourselves, that this is something that is not something to be really concerned about. Number one, and number two is they may be changing regulations which could reclassify that these soils don't even have to be relocated, that they can be kept in place. So with that in mind, we're not talking about something that at least from the professionals would have a significant ecological impact. Is that true?
I defer to Jim maybe on the environmental aspect of that, but as I said, it is a permittable process. Your level of contamination, I'm going to use that word, will depend on what exists currently, which there's no major degradation around the landfill at this point, and how your operations go. In other words, your operations need to be set up so that any stormwater that falls on this material does not migrate off the landfill. It stays within the landfill. And as I mentioned, there is, that landfill is a big filter. It's like a sponge, but it's a big filter. So anything that comes into it and percolates through any of this material that you bring in, most of that is going to get tagged and filtered out by the waste that's in the landfill. Jim, I don't know if you have a better solution for that or better response to that.
Yeah, sure. Just to start off, this has been done before. There is the Tire Pond site in North Haven, New Haven area was one that's, I don't know, within the last 10 years or so, it's pretty much filled up now, was in a similar type of setting. That took in hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of material. It was done safely. So it's been done before. In Connecticut right now, I mean, for landfills like this accepting soil, there's probably like one, there's the Manchester landfill, and there should be more, and it can be done safely. Nick and I, being LEPs, we not only do we do landfill work, we do a lot of brownfields work. I've worked on, my career, hundreds of sites, and we've probably, I've shipped out of state hundreds of thousands of yards of soil. Some of the soil you can actually leave on site under the current regulations. So you're right, Robert, some of the regulations, they're actually relaxing some of that, where you can leave more material on site and either cap it or put it under buildings safely. Because with these urban areas across Connecticut, across New England, with a long industrial history, you just can't take all this stuff off site. You have to be more practical and leave it on site. Connecticut Deep realizes that. But there's just some circumstances where you can't leave it all on site. There's the way you grade a site, you're putting in foundations, there's going to be excess material. So if you have this stuff and you can't reuse it on site, you actually sometimes even reuse it on another site. But sometimes you just don't have another site to bring it to. So it's kind of like light to moderate impacted material. Having a facility like this would be great. In order to get it in there, we have to develop this soil acceptance plan, which would be reviewed by Connecticut Deep. And it would use as a baseline the Connecticut remediation standard regulations, or the RSRs. And the RSRs, they're used what Nick and I do for brownfields cleanup and other site cleanup. they define endpoints for cleanup, and there's standards for soil and groundwater and surface water, et cetera. And then what it boils down to for soil, there's a residential, what they call a direct exposure criteria. And with the direct exposure criteria, or DEC, is that soil that you would be in contact as a human, either ingesting it or getting it on your skin. And there's a residential level and there's an industrial commercial level. And what they did, the tire pond, they allowed soil to come up to the industrial commercial level. So we would propose a criteria somewhere around the industrial commercial level, or less, and then more, or more, for various types of contaminants under a site-specific criteria. And the important thing here, though, we would have in the soil acceptance plan a procedure for testing it to make sure it doesn't leach. So that's really what it boils down to. The two main cleanup criteria is for human exposure through the DEC, or leaching, which is called a pollutant mobility criteria. So we'd say, okay, if it's DEC related, it's going to be capped, and no humans are going to be in contact with the soil. The leaching thing we can test with certain lab procedures, and we'd have leaching criteria in there. It can't leach above a certain threshold, because we don't want any kind of further degradation of the wetlands. And it's similar to what we go through for a site cleanup. You test the soil on site, compared against a DEC or a PMC for where that site's located. And if that site's in an urban area, of course, you're allowed to have higher cleanup levels than if it was like in a residential setting. So we'd go through this rigorous plan. It would be in place, and there would be a monitoring program, a third-party entity overseeing that plan, and as soil came in, they would test it. It would all be done. Very, very similar to what's going on for other out-of-state landfills. I mean, like I said, we've been shipping soil out of state for years up to Massachusetts, but those landfills are filling up, and we just have to come up with some better alternatives, some more local alternatives. And with the stimulus money coming out, there's going to be $5 billion going into brownfields over the next 5 years or so, and that boils down to, I think it's about 10 million a state or so per state. So that money there is going to generate a lot of brownfields redevelopment, a lot of soil generation, and that soil's got to find a home. And having something like this would be great for the economic development, and good for the town. And the time frames, it all depends on when that money becomes available and how economic development happens. But it would be in a few years. It wouldn't be some endless thing that strings on for 15 years or so. It'd be a relatively short time frame. Any questions on that? Okay. Next slide, Kevin.
Okay, so this brings us to the next steps, and we kind of went through our memo backwards. We had the landfill expansion and closure as some of the earlier tasks, but things that need to get completed in this year is the renewal of the stewardship permit. As I said, that needs to be done 6 months before the current permit expires, which is in September. So that backing up 6 months is March. And we've included that in our project support task. Another thing that needs to be done under the stewardship permit this year is the data gap investigation, and we've estimated that the cost of that would be in the order of $35,000. We need to complete the ecological risk assessment, along with the corrective action milestones CA 400 and CA 550. And we've put together a task order for that. Those two items that totals about $10,000, and that's required under the RCRA. And then, depending on where you want to go with the landfill expansion and closure planning, we had two tasks. One was to do the closure and expansion design and application and work with Deep, and we did an estimate a number of years ago. We've revised that based on escalation, and that's now at about $61,500. And then the soil acceptance plan that Jim just went through is about $21,500. So, those are optional. The first couple, the project support with the stewardship permit, the data gap investigation, The ecological risk assessment and the corrective actions under RCRA are things you have to do this year. So as a minimum, I would say those are the ones you need to approve. You need to kick around what you want to do with a landfill expansion and closure planning. That's not something that you have a deadline today to do. So any questions on that?
Well, just one comment, and that is that, town staff is going to have to go back and take a look at, take a look at our game plan for how this can get addressed from a monetary standpoint. We do not have money in next year's budget for this. And we're going to have to evaluate, how we can do pieces of this and present it to the council for your consideration.
Okay.
So we're not asking for the council for any decisions. It's probably going to take us, a couple of months to put that together, but we do have some time. Hopefully we can come up with a plan that's acceptable to the council.
Okay, well, Robert, that concludes our presentation. We appreciate the council's attention for this. I know it's not a topic and a subject that's probably near and dear to your heart, but it's look how much you learned tonight.
And there's no test either right now.
No test. Okay, so if you're all set with us, we'll depart and let you get on with your regular meeting.
Okay, Dana, this is Kathy Puglisi. I want to thank you and your team for preparing this presentation and getting back with us. This is a topic I've been aware of for many, 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 many years, and it's still there, but I understand it's a long-term process. So we certainly appreciate you coming this evening and getting us up to speed as to where we need to be. So thank you to you and your whole team.
Okay, you're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it appears that we are all here. So we'll begin our regular portion of the meeting. Today is Monday, June 1st, 2020 at 7:11 p.m. We do not have any presentations or public hearings scheduled for this evening. So I will ask at this point to ask for approval of the minutes of our previous meeting.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Do you want to go ahead?
It's up
Go ahead,
to
you
Madam
can-
Chair.
Yeah.
This is Christopher Wazorko. I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the May 18th, 2020 regular meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Announcements and reports. Does anybody have any announcements or reports tonight to make?
Kathy, I have a couple, but I'll wait to see if there's any other council members who want to go first.
Anybody have anything? Okay, Robert, it's all yours. Go ahead.
First, I'd like to introduce Kylie Boulay, who was our intern. She can hear us, obviously. Kylie, you want to just unmute yourself for a second and just tell the council a little bit about yourself briefly? You don't have to go into too much detail, but.
Hi, I'm Kylie Boulay. I am interning in the town manager's office. I just finished my first year in UConn's Master's Public Administration program, and I'm very excited to be interning in the town manager's office.
Welcome, Kylie. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Kylie is currently helping us with the Wheeler School project, putting a lot of the records together that Scott Colby had been working on, before he left. And she's also helping us with putting together some of our final budget books, which is something that Scott did as well. So she's trying to pick up some of that work. So far she's been doing a pretty good job for somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience so far. So we're helping her out a little bit. So the other announcement I have is, and I could have done this under my report, but I'll do it now because it's significant. Currently, the town hall has 12 phone lines that come in to it on a normal day, And beginning last week, we were, and since then, we're operating on 3 phone lines, 3 of the 12. All of our offices are working with very limited service, and most, if not all, fax lines are down as well. We do not have an estimated repair date at this time. We're telling people, if you're unable to get through and have the ability to email us, please do so. And town staff can be emailed, by going to the town's website, and this notice is on the website as well. Basically, the problem is with Frontier. It's not with any of our equipment. There's a trunk line that runs from Frontier down West Main Street. Apparently, it has 1,200 pairs or something along those lines of phone lines that are very old, brittle, and apparently it's gotten compromised, and they're the old copper wires. So they're saying that they will begin the repair on Wednesday, and it'll take them 72 man hours once they start to complete. Now, I don't know if that's one person doing 72 hours, which I hope not, whether it's going to be 2 people doing 36 hours, or 4 people doing, you do the math. So 9 people doing, 7 hours. I'm not sure. So, but we're very, because we have, our phones were switching to the voice over IP system. Some of the council members may recall that, working with the school system, we're able to use that system to call out and not take up our trunk lines because we're calling out over the internet, but we can't receive calls that way yet. So, and we could do some internal calls that way as well. So that's helping us a little bit. But if you're getting busy signals when you call us, and a lot of people are, it's kind of a hit or a miss right now. So I just wanted to make that announcement.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, thank you for the update with that. The next item we have is appointments and resignations, and we have a couple of items here. So I will ask for a motion, please.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Motion to accept with regret, the resignation of Jacob Bracco as town treasurer.
Madam Chair, Dave Underwood, second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have another motion to make for that, please.
Madam Chair, motion to appoint Glenn Pettit as town treasurer.
I have a second. Okay. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. We do not have a report from the Board of Education this evening. That would be at our next meeting. Report of the town attorney, Attorney Mastriani. Hello.
Good evening, Madam Chair. I do not have a report for tonight.
Thank you for being with us. On to the report of the town manager. Mr. Lee, it's your turn once again.
Thank you. I do have a few items. The first of which is what we're calling this evening fourth quarter transfers and additional appropriations. Our finance director, Rob Buden, is finalizing the necessary transfers and additional appropriations to close out the fiscal year 20, which ends on June 30th, which is only 30 days away. He expects to complete this work early next week. Under new business this evening is a motion to establish the public hearing at your next meeting on June 15th for the fourth quarter transfers and additional appropriations fiscal year 21. So we will publish a notice of the transfers and the additional appropriations because we've been following it. We've been reporting this through our dashboard each month, or pretty much each month. There's really no big surprises, but we're putting that together, and we will be posting that both online and in the newspapers that particular in advance of the meeting, so people will have the opportunity to comment on it on June 15th. Next item I have is the revenue collector suspense list. In accordance with Connecticut state statutes, the revenue collector has prepared the suspense list of those taxes that are considered uncollectible. These uncollectible taxes fall into 4 main categories, namely motor vehicle taxes, personal property taxes, real estate, and what's known as deceased persons. The amount recommended for a suspense list totals $181,847.97. Once the suspense list is approved, efforts will still be taken to collect these taxes. Efforts will include engaging a collection agency, utilizing the town attorney, and the town constables. In fact, over $33,000 was collected in delinquent taxes and interest from last year's suspense list. There is an item under new business regarding the recommended suspense list, and we do have available this evening. Can answer any questions. It's a long list. Can answer any questions you might have about the suspense list. Anna Lagasse, the revenue collector, is on the phone and is available to help answer any individual questions that I may not be able to answer at this time. So we'll open it up if anybody has any questions about the suspense list.
Hi, Anna. This is Kathy Puglisi. I just have one quick question for you. Our total of $181,847, is that about average for a town or a financial government our size? Are we on the low side? Are we just about where most other cities and towns are in terms of collecting taxes?
We are probably a little higher at collecting, but the 181 is probably about average, and it might be a little low too. Last year's was a little bit higher just because I ended up putting on the One West Main, the one next door to us, and it was pretty high up there. Now it's going to average out probably about the 181 throughout the next few years because we've gotten a lot of the properties that are delinquent under control. And so it's a pretty good list. Most of those are motor vehicle. And right now we have a collection agency who's been collecting they cleaned up a lot of the old motor vehicle taxes. And now they're working on personal property too. And soon I might give them a few of the sewer bills too.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns about the suspense list that Anna put together for us? Okay, Robert, we'll continue on then. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that, motor vehicles, if somebody moves out of state, we have very little leverage in collecting motor vehicles. Our leverage is if somebody wants to register a car in Connecticut. So there's no reciprocal agreements with regards to that. And in fact, even if somebody continues to live in Connecticut, if they register a car under their spouse's name, and not under their name, if the previous car was in their name, they can avoid, there's tricks of the trade, so to speak. So we don't have a lot of leverage on motor vehicles until somebody wants to re-register a car. With regards to personal property, we have a lot of small businesses in Plainville. And when they go out of business, if they have personal property, we have very little leverage to get them to pay up. I do know that some of the larger items that are on the list are in the process of negotiating or working with the property owners. Our only leverage, is to go in and seize the equipment that the delinquent taxes are owed on, and that pretty much puts the company out of business. So it's a very delicate balance with regards to personal property. It's a challenge, but we do continue to make efforts, and I think we're doing an okay job. We're doing a good, I would say an okay job with regards to that, given the tools that we have at our disposal. The next item I have is the COVID-19 update, and this is changing, to the degree that I wasn't really prepared to give much of detail, as late as perhaps yesterday. Because things are changing, almost on a daily basis. So I'll go through it. My report, as far as that's concerned, I'll start with the governor's executive order 7TT, as in Tom, which is entitled Further Reopening Orders. June 1st today, and this won't be, Kevin, this, I don't have all this detail to put online, but as of today, reopening barbers and hair salons. I know for some, that's important. Although Monday's historically the day that barbers and hair salons are closed, so I'm not quite sure how that worked out. But anyhow, that's today. June 1st is also the amended prohibitions on large gatherings, meaning that indoor social and recreational gatherings are permitted for up to and including 10 persons. previously at 5, I believe. Outdoor gatherings are permitted for up to 25 persons, provided that any such large outdoor gathering comply with certain restrictions, including no contact sports. Attendees shall remain 6 feet apart, there's exclusion for immediate family members, and masks must be worn when people are within 6 feet of each other. If you could have 25 people, still have to stand 6 feet apart, and still wear masks. If you're within 6 feet of a person. The religious 49-person limit has been increased for indoor gatherings of no more than 25% capacity with a maximum of 100 persons, and a total of 150 persons for outdoor worship with participants following social distancing guidelines. So if you can follow all that, which isn't all that easy all the time, those are some of the changes that just occurred. Some of the detail that came out last evening. They were announced on Friday, but the devil, of course, is always in the details. The other items is, as a result of this order, the participating regional health municipalities, which Plainville is part of a regional health district, had a conference call with Shane Lockwood, who's our health director. Decision was made to reopen the ball fields, playscapes, skate parks as soon as possible. And I'm meeting with Public Works tomorrow morning to talk about that. The basketball hoops will be reinstalled as well. And additional social distancing signs will be posted. Chief McAtania is in the process of hiring a park patrol person. We hope to have that person on board soon. This person will work approximately 4 days a week, including the weekends, and will be responsible for encouraging social distancing rules. At least the main person, right on with boots on the ground. Fingerprinting for pistol permits will begin again next Monday, June 8th. We're recommending that people check with the police department website for hours when this can be done. Information was included in your packages regarding summer camp and pool reopening. A couple of items with regards to the summer camp. It's being proposed that it be an 8-week program with hours from 9 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. Cost is $95 per week per child. Estimated total revenue for the 30 campers would be about $22,800, assuming that all slots are filled. Estimated expenditures for the 8 weeks totals is estimated at $32,412 based upon the requirements as a result of COVID-19. That's a difference of about $9,600. But most of the projected deficit can be funded by savings in the current fiscal year as a result of the temporary closing of the high school pool and the associated costs that would have been, gone along with that. The recreation staff has also put together some information with regards to the pool. You have a detailed sheet with respect to that. I'll just highlight a couple of items. We're talking about a tentative opening on June 20th, limited to 50 persons inside the fenced area at any one time. And that has to do with some of the requirements that we're getting from the state. We would recommend Plainville residents only. Talking about a $25 pool pass for the season. People would be able to make reservations for 2 blocks of time, I should say. One block would be noon to 3, the other one would be 4 to 7. That period from 3 to 4 would be an opportunity for the staff to do some disinfecting and clean up the areas. Changing areas would not be available, and that lifeguards would maintain social distancing guidelines. There's others as well, other requirements that you have detailed. We are also talking about making plans to open the splash pad and to monitor its operation. On the, participating in the meeting this evening is Courtney Hewitt, our Parks and Recreation Director. She was the primary person, along with Ben Delana, for putting these plans together, and certainly is here to. I'm going to ask her to maybe expand a little bit if she wanted to add anything, and then answer any questions that council members may have. But we would like to. We believe it's important to run the summer camp program. We generally run with 90 in the past, but we're not quite sure, there's additional requirements in terms of campers and their supervision. And we're also, there's a feeling that parents may not, there'd be less demand for this service because some parents may just not want to, send their kids to camp this year, dealing with COVID-19. So it's really a balance. I think, Courtney, we were talking about letting people sign up on a first come, first serve basis. But Courtney, is there anything you'd like to add to what I've just said?
You covered a lot of what I wanted to say, actually. I would just like to further agree with you to the point where I feel like it's very important that we offer this summer camp. A lot of parents are going to be going back to work as we go, throughout the summer. And so I do think this is an essential service to offer. Although the summer camp is something we generally create revenue with, it is sad that with the new guidelines, we won't have the opportunity to do this, but I really feel like this is a service that's needed in the community, and it's something that we would be happy to provide.
I mean, it would require for the pool, it would require people to actually make reservations for blocks of time. My guess is that on certain days, the reservations, the demand will be more than 50 at any time slot, especially on weekends. But I think it's better to offer it than to just not open the pool at all and perhaps provide some type of relief. But certainly feedback from the council would be regarding this would be helpful.
Robert, this is Kathy. I do appreciate the work that's been put together here to try and get some of these activities back in place for everybody, especially the pool and the summer camps. I do have a quick question though, and either you or Courtney might be able to help me with that. It was stated that there will not be changing areas at the pool, which I understand, but will the bathroom facilities be available in that the changing areas and the bathroom facilities are in the same building? Can you help me with that?
Absolutely. So the plan is that we're just going to tell people they need to come with their bathing suits on and they need to leave with their bathing suits on. We can't monitor that 100%, but our idea is the less people that go into the bathroom except to relieve themselves, the safer it'll be. Because once you're outside, it's generally a safer environment. So we want to keep as few people from going inside as we can, just so we can limit any possible contamination.
Okay, thank you. And I would assume that if you're going to be opening up the other areas of the park, such as the skate park and the swings and such, those bathrooms will also be available for people to use. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're available right now.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
That's great. That helps me with my questions.
Yeah, the concession bathrooms are open, and so is the one near the buildings and grounds.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Rosemary.
Yes. I just wanted to say that I am pleased to hear that the park patrol person will be back on duty. I think it's important, especially for purposes of monitoring the outdoor activities at Norton Park and groups that are gathering, whether it's for a sporting event or for another reason, because there still are these guidelines for social distancing and for masks if you're within less than 6 feet, even if it's in an outdoor venue. So I think that's really going to have to be emphasized to folks because, with the summer weather and people perhaps feeling a little bit better about things, I think it would be very easy to lapse into some forgetfulness or a little carelessness, and I don't think we want that to happen. So I'm glad that the patrol person will be there, and I think anything else that can be done to inform people about the guidelines that still are in place for outdoor venues would be very important.
Thanks, Rosemary. Robert, another quick question came to mind. Are we intending to put any sort of hand sanitizing stations in the parks for people to use?
We haven't as of yet.
Okay, just something I thought might have come across your desk.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's hand sanitizers in the bathrooms, but if we leave it out in general, just afraid they would disappear and.
And they would disappear.
I'm thinking more of those stationary ones, such as you have in the lower level near the engineering department. It's not really a bottle. It's in a containment.
Yeah.
On a pedestal.
Yep. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, this is Christopher Wazorko. Just a question for either Courtney or town manager. With the summer program, and I'm glad that we're looking to at least open, although we probably won't be able to accommodate everyone. Is there a possibility that right now, for instance, with the summer camp, we're going to limit it to 30 kids, that we can increase that number based on information we get from the state or any changes that go on during the course of the summer?
Yeah, Courtney and I have talked about this. I'll let you go, Courtney.
Yeah, so we kind of chose the number 30 just because of the OEC guidelines that were introduced on May 18th, excuse me. Basically, those guidelines state that we are only allowed to have 30 children on site at a time, but we can petition for more. I don't want to petition too soon. I would like to see how kind of the first couple weeks go before I ask for more, to see if we can handle more. Or even if there's a demand for it. One of the things that would be a barrier for us to get more, though, is they say that we need to have an indoor space that the children could go if there was like a sudden thunderstorm, that they would need to be social distance. And at Norton Park, there's not a ton of indoor space where we can social distance, more than 30 children at a time. That would be our major problem right there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, I'll assume that the council is supportive of us moving forward with this as we proposed it.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I am also. Dave Underwood here.
Okay. Madam Chair?
Yes, Rosemary.
Yes, no, I definitely am in support as proposed. I think it's been thought out very carefully. Just a question that I think might be helpful for the public to know. If they're in one of our parks and they see activities that are definitely, not in keeping with the different guidelines, what's the advice that you would give people in terms of whom they should contact? I know, as Chief Catania would say, we'd never suggest that people confront other people. Who should they call?
They can call I would recommend they call a non-emergency number of the police department.
Yeah, well, I try soon, but I thought I just wanted to have a check and have it out there publicly. Thank you.
I know that, in summer camp, Courtney and Ben are, when the pool's open, they'll be down in the park a lot of the time during the summer.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If we have a patrol person there, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is generally the hours, and there's, usually after hours, those are our busier times. So hopefully we cover most of it,
Right, yeah. And I wasn't, talking about the summer camp program. I was thinking more of other groups and individuals. Yeah.
Right.
I wasn't worried about the summer camp program.
Right. No, I was, I guess the point I was trying to make is that even some of the summer camp people may see somebody and remind them, or people overseeing the summer camp people. If Courtney will be down in the park more often, she won't be necessarily personally involved with the summer camp per se, those kinds of things.
Right. No, I think that's a good idea too, to have more adults down there for the summer camp. But in this particular case, I was referring to, just people and activities and groups in the park in general. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just like to remind people that it does state only people that are less than 6 feet apart from each other. And also there are people that have medical exemptions for wearing a mask. So I don't think people should be making assumptions about anybody who's in compliance and who's not in compliance and narking people out. I just think that kind of behavior is outrageous, to make assumptions about people when they see groups together. So I can't encourage that at all. I'm totally against that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Just one more thought. I do appreciate, as I said, the work you've been doing on this, and most particularly the pool. I know there's a number of towns in Connecticut that have already said they're not opening their pools. And I understand we really only have our one pool that we have to manage, but managing it is going to take some thoughtfulness. And I think that the people in Plainville, the residents, do enjoy the pool down at Norton Park. I think it's going to be a big benefit for the families and the children that have been kind of inside for a long time. So I do appreciate the thoughtfulness and planning that you put together so that we could at least offer that pool in some fashion for most of the summer. So thanks for doing that. I appreciate it.
No, I totally appreciate everyone's support. I really wanted to, have some form of summer this summer. I think it's really important for the morale of the community.
Next item I have is the summer schedule. The town council has historically reduced the number of regular meetings during the summer months. Town staff is suggesting that the town council consider canceling the meetings held on the first Mondays during the months of July, which would be July 6th, August, which would be August 3rd, the September, which would be September 8th, and then have our meetings on the second or the third Mondays of the month, the second meeting in a month, which is the third Mondays during July, August, and September. The reason why we suggested limiting the first Mondays is because the one in July is usually around July 4th, which is a long weekend or week, big holiday time, and the one the first one in September is generally the day after Labor Day. So people are, those are days when people are do availability issues. So if we need special meetings, we would call them as necessary. No action is necessarily required by the council. If the council says, hey, that makes sense to us, town staff will do the required notifications with respect to canceling the meetings. You don't need to do it officially yourselves, but we can take care of that. So we'd like some feedback on it if you think that works for you.
Madam Chair.
Wazarko?
Yes, Christopher Wazarko. I'm fine with that. It's pretty much what we've done every summer, and if we need a special meeting, we certainly can add it, but that schedule will work for me.
Okay, I think I'm okay too. I just want to double check a couple of dates, but if everybody can just look at their calendars, make sure that this is all right, and then we have the following meeting where we can finally say these dates are going to work, or get back to Robert if there's any conflicts that anybody foresees. So we'll hear from everybody and make sure it's okay.
Some questions have arisen with regards to when we might be able to move away from council meetings being done via Zoom and get back together again in the municipal centers. We did have a brief conversation today with the other towns as well as the health director. I mean, right now, we're waiting for direction again with regards to the governor. The feeling is that we may be doing this for the remainder of the summer, and it wouldn't be until September that things will loosen up as far as indoor gatherings that might involve the municipal center. At some point in time, I wouldn't be surprised if we did some type of combination where council members some council members could choose to come to the meeting itself, and others could depending upon your particular circumstances, want to do it via Zoom, and we could do that on the large screen for those people who call in. So I mean, it may be a hybrid, who knows, but I don't see that we don't see that currently loosening up before perhaps September 1st. So just to put that out there. The next item for under my report is the happenings, and I'm going to turn it over to Kylie to read those. We went over those this afternoon, but I was going to turn it over to her, and then we'll be available to answer questions you may have for us when she's done.
All right. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
So the first message tonight is from Youth Services. Healthy Plainville wants to remind everyone that it's always important to eat a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and lean protein and to get regular exercise. It's especially important during this pandemic. Studies have shown that people who are obese and have conditions like heart disease and type 2 diabetes are especially vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19. The article linked on the screen illustrates the importance of reducing inflammation and boosting immunity with a healthy diet and regular exercise, which can be as important as social distancing to stay healthy. And that article will also be available on the town website. The Tax and Assessing Office wants everyone to know that tax bills are scheduled to be mailed out by June 15th. The Tax and Assessing Office, along with the rest of Town Hall, will reopen to the public on June 8th. Residents visiting the Town Hall are reminded to wear a face mask when entering the building. Fire Marshal and Emergency Services just want to remind everyone that CBIA's free PPE for small businesses, nonprofits, and places of worship is continuing until supplies run out. Delivery of available supplies will be coordinated by the Plainville Fire Marshal. Request masks can be made through the CBIA portal, which is also linked on the screen. Curbside pickup at the library has resumed. This service is available to Plainville residents only who have a valid Plainville library card. Patrons from neighboring communities are very much appreciated, and we look forward to serving them again when our doors reopen. For now, this restriction is necessary in order to control demand. Holds are limited to items owned by the Plainville Public Library. Items from other libraries are unavailable. Holds can be placed either online or by phone. Staff is available to answer calls from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday to Friday. To place a hold online, you can visit plainvillect.com/library to search the catalog. To place a hold by phone for adult materials, please dial 860-793-1446. To place a hold by phone for children and teen materials, please dial 860-793-1450. A message from the Senior Center. Although the Senior Center is closed for in-person programs and activities, the staff is still available by phone during regular business hours. They have the option to talk with the nurse on Zoom Tuesday, June 2nd at 9:30 a.m. Our Senior Center nurse, Georgia Sturpka, will present a program on Zoom to discuss the coronavirus/COVID-19, how to keep yourself protected, the proper way to put on and remove a face mask, review current health and safety guidelines, and more. There will also be time for questions and answers. Call the Senior Center to register and receive the Zoom link and password. The number is 860-747-5728. An update on the 2020 census. As of May 31st, 2020, Plainville reached a 71.0% self-response rate. The national rate is 60.5% and Connecticut's rate is 64.1%. Today, lawn signs were installed around town. Reminder flyers are being distributed with school lunch pickups and at the food pantry. Residents are urged to respond online at www.2020census.gov.
That's it.
Thanks, Kylie. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Robert with his report or for Kylie with her happenings? All right, thank you both for your information. We'll move on to item number 9, public comments. We did receive an email from John Kislick, the only one we received for this meeting. He addressed assorted topics, and he did ask about opening up the public meetings. As Robert had already discussed, it sounds like we'll most likely go through until September unless there's other advisement from the governor in different direction we might get. So we'll keep looking at that. I do find it interesting to do a hybrid meeting, Robert, in terms of if some counselors wish to be in person, and then we could still have others participate via Zoom. I think that's a very interesting idea, and we'll see how that works out as we move along through the rest of the summer and into September. So that's a great idea. If there are no other public comments. We don't have any old business tonight, so we'll move on to our new business portion of the meeting. We have item number 1. May I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
motion to establish a public hearing on Monday, June 15th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m. to hear public comment on an ordinance entitled Ordinance Establishing Fourth Quarter Transfer for Fiscal Year Ending June 30th, 2020.
Madam Chair, Dave Underwood, second that motion.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Are there any other comments on that motion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Item number 2, please.
Madam Chair, motion to establish a public hearing on Monday, June 15th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m. to hear public comment on additional appropriations for fiscal year 2020 budget.
May I have a second, please?
Madam
Second.
Chair,
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Item number 3.
Madam Chair, motion to approve the revenues collectors suspense list.
May I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. And finally, item number 4, please. May I have a motion?
Madam Chair, motion to approve the tax refunds is listed on the addendum.
May I have a second?
Madam Chair, Dave Underwood, second.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion. I have a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Robert, do we have any other items or discussions of interest tonight?
I have one item, and that is the Americold project on Northwest Drive has begun. If you've driven up in that area recently, a stark contrast to what you would see, for the development at large with a lot of the tree growth and whatnot removed in preparation for the construction of the building. Meaning there is a landscaping plan at the end, so hopefully, when all is said and done, other than the height of the building, which I think will be fairly dramatic, it'll be dressed up nice in terms of the presentation, as is the rest of the Farmington Corporate Park has always had a very nice presentation. The town attorney Mike Mastriani, Anne Marie, the assessor, and myself had a conference call today with Americold representatives, with regards to, the tax abatement items that we previously discussed with the council. We're putting together a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, which will detail the arrangements, and we would bring that forward to the council's consideration. It will probably be the July meeting because they have to run it past their corporate people. That's going to take us a couple of weeks to put together, and then we pass it along to them. Once the MOU's in place, that we wouldn't actually do the abatement until the project was completed. So that basically would detail, if you do this and you do that, then you will get this in the end. And so, and then in the end, the council will again review the final version of that. So just wanted to give you a little bit of update that that project is moving forward. We're very happy about the fact that it's moving forward, and just to give you an idea of what might be forthcoming in the next couple of months.
Hey, thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to add that they'd like to offer tonight?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Rosemary.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Deb had commented, and I do want to say to Deb and the council, I really do respect your input and the points that you made, Deb. But a couple of things. I just felt that, and I'm somebody who walks in the park a lot. And if you, for example, see a large group gathering, everybody in close proximity with no mask, it could be disturbing. And I wanted people to know what they should do in a case like that. However, I would say that I think we need to put great emphasis more on raising people's awareness and in advance of the situations arising. And I think having the patrol person at the park will help with that. And I think any publicity that we can do, just so that people are more aware in advance of doing anything, I think would be very helpful. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Rosemary. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It's just as someone that has asthma, I have been
I know
accosted on numerous occasions by
Oh, my
people
goodness, yeah.
because I don't have a mask on, and it's a problem because people are just crazy sometimes about it.
Right,
you know.
right. Yeah, frankly, I was thinking more of gatherings that people have, and because I think that's gonna, so with the good weather and everything, I think that's more likely to happen. And also, I think the more emphasis that we can put on just making people aware in advance is good, and also making people aware, perhaps more aware, that there are folks who cannot wear a mask for medical reasons. But that's fine.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Those are great comments. And Robert, I was just wondering, maybe with our upcoming changes where the parks are going to be opening up a little bit more, and we're going to have some rules about the swimming pool opening. Is there something you think might be worthwhile if we post it on our website or create a press release so that once these things start to evolve, people have a little bit of information about what the expectations are?
Absolutely. We wanted to get through this evening's meeting to see if there's any feedback from the council, but after this evening, we will begin to ramp up the public information. We didn't want to assume, in case the council wanted to make some changes. So yes, absolutely. Very good idea.
Okay, thanks. I think people would, that would be very helpful to a lot of people that still have questions. Okay, any other comments from any of the council members? Anybody else here? No? Okay. Well, thank you for that information. We do not have an executive session this evening, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn at this point.
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all for your attendance tonight. I appreciate it. Stay
Good
well.
night. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Have a good
Have a
week.
good night, everybody.
Be safe, everyone.
Mhm.